I am Thomas, and we are in Ozone Park. We're going to be traveling through the neighborhood, tell you the story of murder and mayhem in what was Woodhaven, which is now Ozone Park. Happened in 1921, and the neighborhood obviously is a lot different. Picture farmland, picture a lot more spaces. It's a tale involving Peter Nunziata and a group of his friends and a professor and his family whose life was drastically cut short. Going down Woodhaven, going down actually in Ozone Park here, going down 89th and Sutter, Ozone Park, Woodhaven as it was called at that time, we were looking at around 15, 20 miles outside of New York City. So we're close to everything as it was even back in the 20s. The city was the center of everything. So on a frigid night in 1921, Professor Kakov had just departed the A train at Boyd Avenue, 88th Street, stationed on Liberty Avenue in what was then considered Woodhaven. I will take you to what is that train stop right now, modern day, and we'll discuss how Peter Nunziata plays into how he crossed the path of Mr. Kakov. So, Mr. Kakov was a professor of philosophy at a Jewish theological seminary in Manhattan. And he was accustomed to coming home late. And he would cut across an empty lot at the corner of Benedict, that's what the street was called at that point, which was 87th Street. I will show you that in a minute as well, and Liberty. Here we are at the intersection of Liberty, and this was 88th Street, Boyd Avenue. So either one of these sides is where Mr. Kakov got off the train that night coming home from work. So either to the left or to the right, as you can see right across the street. So he was a professor of philosophy at a Jewish seminary in Manhattan. And this was his daily routine. He would take the train to come home, where he lived with his wife and 2 children. It was in a dark, vacant lot, just after the clock struck midnight, that 4 young men lay in wait with robbery and mayhem in their minds. Cries for help were heard by a patrolman, an officer of the precinct in Richmond Hill, which would be the next town over. Here is the paper of the people charged in the crime. So the patrolman heard he was on patrol. He heard the screams of Mr. Kakov blocks away. When the officer had arrived at the scene, he found Kakov lying face down in the snow, a bloody iron bedpost at his side. So he was attacked by what seems to be a bedpost. 4 young men were seen fleeing the scene. The officer pursued the young men and managed to quickly apprehend 2 of them. We're taking you see how 87th Street looked like now, right across the street. That lot would be somewhere approaching here. We'll zip around. Peter Nunziata, Joseph Alfano of Brooklyn were immediately arrested, and once at the precinct, they confessed, and they implicated Frank Caseso from Brooklyn and Alfonso the Turk Verona of Water Street, which was Woodhaven, in the attack. Remember, all the neighborhood, eventually with the expansions, the neighborhoods, and their borders changed. So this is all, as of 100 years ago. So according to their confessions, it was Verona who had suggested that they prepare for a stick-up. An abandoned iron bed frame was found in a vacant lot, and a heavy post with a brass knob was pried off. The group of four, they stood near the Boyd Avenue station, which we already seen. The iron post hidden under Nunziata's long coat, and they waited for someone who appeared prosperous enough to rob, which was Professor Katkov. And there you see the paper again from back then in 1920. After they had attacked him, they turned out his pockets inside out, looking for anything but money. Any type of money rather. But very little was to be found. Now we're approaching the block, where the empty lot was, which odds are this was one of the homes of. One of these homes was the Katkov residence. It just wasn't clear which one in this area. If we use our imagination. So, Mr. Katkov had really no money. All they wound up taking was his horn-rimmed glasses, his fountain pen, and his gold watch. This is what I theorize would have been the lot right here where this garage is. So imagine he's coming down the station, from Boyd Avenue, about a block, cutting through this lot, going up the street to one of his homes there. And, right before the tragedy struck. So Mr. Katkov was taken to what was Mary Immaculate Hospital. The hospital was in Jamaica, Mary Immaculate Hospital, where he died 3 days later. There were immediate calls for swift justice, owing to the fact that Katkov had made no resistance, nor was he ever given the opportunity. Newspaper editorials called for the ultimate retribution, the electric chair. The wheels of justice indeed swift. Within a week, there were indictments. They were handed down, but first week of April. Just over 5 weeks after the attack, trial began for Peter Nunziata. The 17-year-old, the youngest of the four attackers, who customary in court, often seen yawning during testimony, he was bored. At one time during the trial, he was scolded by the judge for actually trying to light a cigarette in court. The 17-year-old Nunziata was the youngest at that time in New York State to be indicted for the electric chair. So this was youngest person ever sentenced to death in New York. This was big news back then in 1920. The defense for Nunziata was a vigorous one. His attorney had Nunziata take the stand on his own behalf, and he declared that it was Verona of Woodhaven who was the mastermind. Yes, we were led to believe that he was the mastermind, and that the killing was to settle a personal score against Mr. Katkov. Nunziata also claimed that his confession was beaten out of him by the police with a rubber hose, and that he was just at the wrong place, the wrong time. April 18th, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours and came back with a verdict of guilty, and that included an hour for lunch. So Mr. Nunziata, he sat unmoved when the verdict was read. The judge explained to the young man what the verdict meant, that he would soon face death in the electric chair. A few days later, the judge set the date already of execution, June 5th, 6 weeks away. Nowadays, with the death penalty cases, a lot of these people convicted, they wait 15, 20 years before they even get a date. Back then, 1921, 6 weeks. The attack, the investigation, the indictment, the trial, the deliberation, and the sentencing all took place during a 105-day window. The public back then, they demanded swift justice, and they received it. Nunziata was the youngest person ever sentenced to death in New York. And he took that sentence coolly. Didn't even flinch. Escorted out of the courtroom to a car waiting to drive him to death row in Sing Sing, upstate New York, where old Sparky was reigning. That is the electric chair. Once again, we are near the what would have been the lot on 87th. And remember that this just took this whole incident just took a block. A block from the train station, which we're right here. This is how the train station looks like now, where Mr. Katkoff had gotten off. He would have walked 1 block, seen that lot, cut across it, and went up the block, you would imagine, to his family home. And within that block and a half, that's where tragedy had struck. Times were a lot different than they are now. Justice spoke very, very quickly back then.